You might think you know Patrick, the iconic dancer, the charming romantic lead, and the unforgettable star of films like Ghost and Dirty Dancing. But behind the fame, behind the striking good looks and irresistible charisma, was a man locked in a private and relentless battle. It was a fight he never asked for, but he faced it with unwavering strength. This is the unfiltered, little-known story of Patrick Swayze's final days, how he confronted a devastating diagnosis, how he refused to fade away silently, and how he clung to love when it was the only thing left. This is a walk through the last moments of his life, and the final words that still resonate with those he left behind. Before everything changed, Patrick Swayze was the beloved star admired around the globe. Long before his name was tied to pancreatic cancer, he had already carved out a place in Hollywood history. He wasn't born into privilege or fame, but he carried himself like someone destined to be on screen. Raised in Houston, Texas, he was the son of a choreographer mother and a cowboy father, a blend of elegance and toughness that defined who he was. Hollywood loved to label people, but Patrick didn't fit into any one box. Was he the refined dancer trained in ballet and classical technique, or the rugged, all-American heartthrob with a southern accent and piercing gaze? The truth is, he was both. And that rare combination made him unforgettable. His breakthrough came in 1987 with Dirty Dancing. No one expected a modest dance film to explode into a global sensation, but Patrick's portrayal of Johnny Castle struck a cultural nerve. Women were captivated. Men admired him. Teenagers attempted that famous lift in pools for years afterward. But Patrick wasn't just charm and choreography. He followed it with Ghost, a deeply emotional performance filled with subtlety and pain. The movie became a blockbuster and earned him a Golden Globe nomination. Suddenly, Patrick wasn't just a commercial success, he was proving his weight as a serious, emotionally nuanced actor. In the late 80s and early 90s, Patrick built a reputation as the quiet, strong type, with a soul. Whether he played thrill-seeking surfers in Point Break or deeply wounded characters in City of Joy, he brought sincerity and emotional depth to every scene. Fame never changed his work ethic. He insisted on doing his own stunts, trained rigorously, and endured pain without complaint. The glitz of Hollywood never replaced the discipline he learned in the dance studio or the grit he picked up growing up in Texas. He was a man completely in charge of his fate. And that's what made the next chapter so painful, because his fall didn't come from scandal or career missteps. It came from something far worse. And it crept in quietly. The beginning of the end started with a diagnosis that stunned Hollywood. It began as a mild stomach ache, some discomfort he brushed off. At his age and with such a demanding lifestyle, it didn't seem unusual. He figured it was stress, digestion, or maybe a strained muscle. But the pain persisted, sharper, constant, waking him in the middle of the night. His wife, Lisa, urged him to get checked out. Eventually, he did. What began as routine scans quickly escalated. Blood work led to biopsies. And suddenly, everything shifted. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. One of the most lethal cancers known today. Often referred to as the silent killer, pancreatic cancer usually goes undetected until it's too late, when it has already spread. In Patrick's case, it had reached his liver. The doctors didn't sugarcoat it. This type of tumor wasn't just incurable, it couldn't be managed in any meaningful way. The chances of survival were almost non-existent. Median life expectancy at that stage is just 3 to 6 months. Many don't even get that far. For most people, a diagnosis like that would have been crushing, an ending. But Patrick wasn't like most people. Rather than break down, he met his doctor's eyes and simply asked, "What are we going to do about it?" His wife, Lisa Nami, his lifelong partner and closest confidant, stood by his side. Together, they entered battle mode. They weren't expecting miracles, just time. Days, weeks, anything they could get. A clinical trial at Stanford University Medical Center provided a glimmer of hope. Dr. George Fisher was leading a team researching Vadalinib, a drug designed to prevent tumors from growing new blood vessels, essentially starving them. While it wasn't FDA approved and its effectiveness wasn't guaranteed, it was something, and that was enough for Patrick to fight for. He didn't just want more time, he wanted control of his life back. This determination would fuel him longer than anyone anticipated. The final battle began when Patrick returned to set. January turned into February, and then into March. Patrick started his experimental treatment with Vadalinib, and the side effects were unpredictable. He was exhausted, nauseous, and his body was venturing into unknown territory. But he never missed a dose. He never showed doubt. In fact, when asked about his condition, he didn't mention pain or fatigue. "I'm a miracle, dude," he would say. On April 2, 2008, he went back to Stanford for a scan to check his progress. The results were surprisingly positive. His liver lesions hadn't grown, some had even become less active, and the pancreatic tumor hadn't spread. While he wasn't cured, and there was still a long way to go, he was standing, fighting, and holding his ground. That moment gave him what he needed most, the permission to live again, and he wasted no time. By September, just months after his diagnosis became public, Patrick signed on to star in The Beast, a grueling crime drama that required long hours, complex dialogue, and physically intense scenes. It was a gamble, and executives and insurance agents were nervous. But Patrick showed up every day. He refused to use a body double. He memorized every line and fully committed. This wasn't about his image or his career, it was about defiance, proving that he still had something left to give. He worked 5 days a week, filming long, taxing shifts of 14 to 16 hours. When the cameras stopped, he spent his weekends receiving chemotherapy. Most actors would have dropped out, and no one would have faulted him for it. But Patrick believed that work was part of his therapy, keeping his mind engaged was just as crucial as the treatment he received. And in some ways, he was right. During those months, he wasn't a patient. He was an actor again. Every scene he filmed, every line he delivered, was a victory against the ticking clock. Behind the scenes, though, there was pain, pride, and a quiet desperation. On screen, Patrick Swayze remained commanding and sharp. But behind the camera, the real battle was being fought. Each morning, he rose with the discipline of a soldier, not because he felt strong, but because acting strong was his only choice. He would drink herbal tea to ease his nausea, apply his makeup with trembling hands, and walk onto set like nothing was wrong. It was a performance within a performance. But cancer is a relentless force, not only attacking the body but eroding a person's sense of self-worth. For Patrick, a man who had spent his life building his image through physical strength and discipline, the disease was a thief. His hair thinned, his eyes lost their spark, and his movements slowed. He could feel the change before it was visible in the mirror. Still, he refused to be treated like a patient. Producers suggested altering the shooting schedule to account for his chemo fatigue, but he refused. "I'll let you know when I can't do it anymore," he said. That day never came, because he never allowed it. But behind the pride, the pain continued to grow. Friends later remembered times when Patrick would disappear for a few minutes during scenes, only to slip away and vomit or regain his composure. And when he returned, it was always with a smile that said, "Let's go again." There was one moment, though, that revealed the full truth if anyone was paying attention. During a break in shooting, Patrick's longtime friend found him curled up in his trailer, his body shaking uncontrollably, soaked in sweat. His voice was quiet as he said, "Just hold my hand." He wasn't asking for rescue or breaking down. He just wanted someone to be there, not as a fan, not as a fixer, just to be present. This was a side of Patrick the world had never seen. The man who could command the attention of millions, but in that moment, simply needed to be held. As the show wrapped and the spotlight faded, the cancer grew stronger, more aggressive, more relentless. It was far from over. The mask began to slip. With the beast wrapped and out in the world, Patrick could no longer hide, not from the public, not from the press, and certainly not from the disease. Cancer. January 2009 marked a pivotal moment, not only in Patrick's health but in his reality. After wrapping up the series, he was quickly rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center due to a sudden case of pneumonia. For most people, pneumonia might just mean a few days of rest, but for someone undergoing chemotherapy with a weakened immune system, it could be life-threatening. The illness forced the world to pay attention. Until then, Patrick had managed to keep the worst of his fight out of the public eye, but paparazzi images of his frail appearance, sunken cheeks, and oxygen tube exposed the harsh reality: the disease was winning. Despite his failing health, Patrick remained focused on next steps, unwilling to consider doing nothing. His doctors suggested an experimental treatment, a combination of Abraxane and GMSAR, two powerful chemotherapy drugs that had not yet been approved for use together. It was a high-risk option, with concerns over toxicity, side effects, and effectiveness. But Patrick didn't hesitate for a moment. He gave his consent immediately. The treatment was grueling, and he began losing his hair, something that affected him more deeply than many would expect. Patrick had always carried himself with pride and presence, and losing his hair felt like a sign that the battle was far from even. To maintain his dignity, he wore wigs in public, forcing himself to smile through his discomfort. His weight dropped dramatically, his skin became pale and sunken, and even short walks became exhausting. Despite the fatigue and nausea, he continued trying to live life as normally as possible. He rode horses, watched movies, and discussed potential future roles. But his body was no longer cooperating. Those closest to him noticed the subtle changes, the slow speech, the occasional confusion, and the way he seemed distant, not fully present. His cancer had spread beyond his pancreas and liver. It was everywhere now, and his body, once strong, was now a battlefield, losing ground with every passing day. It was time for a change. Patrick decided to return home. In April 2009, Patrick left the chaos of Hollywood and the sterile environment of hospital rooms behind. He and Lisa returned to their ranch in California, a peaceful retreat nestled in the hills, surrounded by horses. This was where Patrick felt truly at peace, where life slowed down, and everything felt real again. He didn't see it as giving up, he called it going back to what mattered. The ranch had always been a sanctuary for them: long rides across the pastures, evenings on the porch watching sunsets, and the sound of hooves on dirt. For Patrick, it was more than just home, it was a part of him. But everything had changed. His once strong body had been reduced to frailty by the chemotherapy. Even getting on a horse was a struggle now. Sometimes, he would just stand by the fence, watching them. Lisa took on everything, managing the ranch, cooking meals, administering medications, and staying up through the night when the pain became unbearable. She watched as the man she had loved since they were teenagers slowly disappeared. Yet, she never let him feel as though he was fading away. Patrick held on to a sense of normalcy for as long as he could. He wore his wig around guests, smiled for the occasional photo, and remained upright even when he was ready to collapse. He still cracked dry jokes, his humor tinged with sarcasm, as it always had been. But his energy was draining fast, and the media wasn't far behind. Paparazzi gathered near the ranch, hoping for the perfect shot: Patrick sees, unfiltered and undone. Eventually, they got it. A series of photos surfaced, showing Patrick walking slowly, with Lisa by his side. His body was skeletal, his eyes sunken, and he looked years older than his 57 years. The headlines were harsh, unrecognizable. The NC's wasting away. But what they couldn't capture was the intimacy behind closed doors, the late-night talks, the small victories, like getting out of bed on his own, or the quiet moments when Lisa simply sat beside him, holding his hand without saying a word. At that point, words didn't matter anymore. Patrick was exhausted, and deep down, he knew what was coming. The storm he had fought against for 20 months was finally at his door. By late August, Patrick's health had worsened drastically. The signs were clear: prolonged fevers, uncontrollable tremors, and extreme fatigue. One day, he collapsed with a high fever and an elevated heart rate. Blood tests confirmed the grim reality: hypercalcemia, hyponatremia, gastrointestinal bleeding, and nearly no white blood cells left. His body wasn't just weakening, it was shutting down. Lisa rushed him to Cedars-Sinai once again, but this time there were no new treatments, no more hope. On September 9, The doctors gave them the words no one ever wants to hear: "There's nothing more we can do." That night, Patrick came home for the last time. The events leading to his death were shared by Lisa in a 2011 interview, where she said, "I can't keep this secret anymore." According to Lisa, here's what happened during Patrick's final days. The house was still, and the atmosphere was heavy. The man who had once graced stages and movie sets now spent most of his time in bed, barely able to sit up. The tumors had spread to his bones, nerves, and organs, causing relentless pain. Morphine had become a necessity just to keep him conscious. Lisa took on the role of his full-time nurse. She carefully administered Dilaudid, adjusting the doses to ease his pain without dulling his awareness. Patrick, stubborn to the very end, resisted sedation as long as he could. He wanted to remain present, even if it meant enduring unimaginable suffering. Then, on September 11th, Lisa's brother Eric and his wife Mary came to visit. The house was dim, and the energy was subdued. Patrick drifted in and out of consciousness. But for one brief moment, clarity returned. He turned to Lisa, his voice a whisper, "I love you." Lisa leaned in, replying, "I love you too." They didn't know it at the time, but those would be their final words. Simple, not dramatic or poetic, just pure and sincere. Over the next 2 days, Patrick slipped into a coma. His breathing became shallow, and his fragile body grew even stiller with each passing hour. Then, at 10 a.m. on September 14th, Lisa sat by his side and noticed the change. One deep breath, a long final inhale, and then silence. Donnie rushed in, hoping for something, anything. But it was over. Patrick had passed. However, he didn't leave alone or without love. He departed just as he had lived, with courage, dignity, and with someone holding his hand. After the silence came grief, rumors, and a test of loyalty. In the days after Patrick's death, the ranch was eerily quiet. The horses still grazed in the pastures. The breeze continued to rustle the trees. But inside the house, there was nothing but emptiness. Lisa, now mourning the loss of her partner of 34 years, was suddenly surrounded by noise, though not of mourning, but of rumors. It didn't take long for the tabloids to move in. Articles appeared on gossip websites like Radar Online, alleging that Lisa had mistreated Patrick in his final months. Anonymous sources accused her of emotional neglect and even abuse. They painted a picture of a woman who isolated him, denied him medication, and controlled the narrative surrounding his death. It was sensational, ugly, and, according to those who were truly there, completely false. Lisa's friends and family quickly came to her defense. Medical records reviewed by independent experts, such as Dr. Richard Hunter, told a very different story. Patrick's care was not only consistent but extraordinary. Every pain spike was addressed. Every complication was managed. Every doctor's visit was followed up on. Dr. Hunter, having reviewed Patrick's records firsthand, publicly stated there was no evidence of abuse or neglect. He even noted that Patrick's survival for nearly 20 months after his diagnosis wouldn't have been possible without the consistent, devoted care he received. And that's exactly what Lisa had provided. Others close to Patrick during his final months referred to Lisa as his guardian angel. She cooked, cleaned, tracked medications, coordinated with doctors, and stayed awake through the night when the pain was unbearable for him. But, as often happens after a celebrity death, public speculation doesn't cease with the person's passing. A vacuum is created that invites conspiracy theories, and when the truth is silent, scandal tends to fill the void. However, those who truly knew Patrick and Lisa never wavered in their support for her. Donnie's close friends, medical staff, and even Patrick's former colleagues all shared the same sentiment: Patrick's final chapter was not one of betrayal but of steadfast love. And, as he had shown in both life and death, love was what mattered most. Patrick's survival, despite his diagnosis, was remarkable. When he was first diagnosed, even his doctors braced themselves for the worst. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, especially when it has already spread to the liver, is considered a death sentence by medical standards. Most patients barely live for 3 months, 6 if they're lucky. Patrick. Patrick and Lisa were one of those rare couples. They met as teenagers, married young, and stayed together for more than 30 years. Their relationship wasn't perfect, no real one ever is, but it was genuine. They argued, drifted apart, and found their way back to each other. Through every season of Patrick's life, Lisa remained his steady presence. In interviews, when asked what kept him grounded, Patrick never credited fame or fortune. He always spoke of her. Their bond, especially during his illness, went beyond romance. It was practical, emotional, and deeply spiritual. Lisa was more than his wife, she was his caregiver, his confidant, and his anchor. Despite his success, Patrick never lost sight of his roots. He stayed close to his Texas upbringing, remained humble, and often praised his mother for instilling the discipline that shaped him. Even with global fame, he held on tightly to the quiet, grounded man behind the celebrity. Yes, he was a movie star, but more than that, he was a fighter and a devoted husband. He faced death head-on, choosing to meet it with grace. And that version of Patrick, the one defined by strength, love, and resilience, lives on in those he touched and in the way he left the world. In the end, what Patrick left behind matters most. In a world obsessed with fame and perfection, his final act was profoundly, beautifully human. In those closing moments, the truth of his life became clear, it was always about connection. Patrick's story moves us not because he avoided death, but because of how courageously he embraced it, with an open heart. He chose to go on his own terms. His legacy isn't just in his films, awards, or red carpet memories. It's in the quiet moments, how he lived when no one was watching, how he fought through the pain, how he smiled despite it, and how he held on to love when everything else slipped away. Perhaps his greatest lesson was this: dying doesn't have to be tragic. There can be beauty in goodbye. True strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a whisper that says, "I love you," before fading into silence. What's your favorite Patrick Swayze moment? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.